The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network. It's time for the Guillotine Grapevine, a podcast for the land of 10,000 wrestlers. 10,000 wrestlers. Now, here's your host, award-winning wrestling broadcast journalist, Jason Bryant.
It's the Guillotine Grapevine going on location, which is not atypical for this show to go on location. But today, we're talking with Minnesota native Bill May as we sit here in Dortmund, Germany at the Junior European Wrestling Championships. Bill is a Minnesota native out of LeSueur and has been a voice of wrestling, a scribe of wrestling for a very long time. We're going to talk to him about his background. But, Bill, welcome to the Guillotine Grapevine.
Hi.
So, a little bit about Bill. You're part of the media team for United World Wrestling, have been kind of in that role in a volunteer position for a while, but now you're actually officially part of the team for the last number of years. And just give the people back in our, my new home and your old home, a little bit of a background on what you do for United World Wrestling.
It happened after wrestling was kicked out of the Olympics, and the new people coming in saw the need for a media team, and they got some people lined up, and one of them, Bob Condren, needed a writer, a journalist, and he talked to some people he knew around the world about wrestling journalism and sports journalism in general, and my name kept popping up because I just know some people, and he asked me to lend a hand with Save Olympic Wrestling. Then after that, once we got wrestling back in, or once wrestling was had its position restored in the Olympic Games, Bob came up with the idea of international rankings that would provoke some controversy and discussion, and it would just be something that would be a monthly feature on the United World Wrestling website, and we went with that, and then they started assigning me the different championships, and I just did what I had been doing for, I don't know, some 35, 40 years.
And now that the governing body was behind it, they said, okay, now we'll write you a check.
Well, yeah. Bob Condren understood how this whole thing worked, and he knew that they couldn't just ask me to volunteer my time. So, he was he got it all going for us, and here we are.
Yeah, you're based out of the Czech Republic, but again, originally from Minnesota. Wrestled at a school you don't really like to bring up anymore, but just for clarity reasons, you wrestled at St. Thomas. And let's go back to your days in Minnesota. What got you into wrestling, and how did you start? Well,
I was just a short, fat, dumpy kid in grade school, and wrestling.
I can relate, by the way.
Wrestling was just something we had to do in the winter when we were 5th grade, 6th grade, and the wrestlers from high school would come down and teach us a little bit about wrestling, and then we would have a grade school championships, and one of the guys from the high school pulled me over and said, hey, when you go to junior high school, you should join the wrestling team. So, yeah, why not? Something to do after school.
Well, that's now led to a long career in not just wrestling journalism, but for a while you were competing, after college with the Minnesota Wrestling Club. So a couple run-ins you were telling me over dinner a couple times when we talked about Minnesota wrestling, guys like Pat Marcy and Dan Chandler. You've had had a scrap or two.
Well, they weren't really scraps. We had two dummies in the room. We had Bill and we had Bill. And I was the other Bill. So, no, I used to have fun telling some of my other friends that, I helped the Minnesota Wrestling Club get to the Olympics, because I was their throwing dummy all those years. So that's about it.
Now, when it came time to get into journalism, how did that begin? Where did that love affair with the written word begin?
In high school, I wrote for the high school newspaper. I was the sports editor my senior year. When I went to St. Thomas, I didn't know whether to major in chemistry or journalism. Or as one friend used to say, I didn't know whether to bomb the world or write about it. So I ended up in journalism because the afternoon labs for chemistry cut into wrestling practice.
Man, you can't have that.
Right. So it was kind of the writing on the wall, so to speak.
Now, you're of Japanese heritage, and you had the opportunity to end up working in Japan at the Kyoto News, right? Explain what the news system is like in Japan and how you ended up there.
Well, Kyoto News was the major. Well, there are two major news agencies in Japan. One is Kyoto, and one is GG. They both grew out of the wartime propaganda machine that the Japanese had, and GG was more, I guess, economic news, and Kyoto became more general and things like that. But over the years, there were demands on the people at Kyoto to add sports news to their English language service, and most people wanted the economic news, they wanted the political, the diplomatic news, but there was always a call for news about baseball, news about sumo. The Japanese were getting better in golf and tennis, and so they wanted a little news in English about those things. And the people at Kyoto had heard that I was working at the Japanese Wrestling Federation. At the time, I was doing research at Sophia University in Tokyo, and just volunteering some time with the Japan Wrestling Federation, helping them organize some events, translating, writing English, things like that. And one of the sports journalists from Kyoto met me, and he mentioned me to some people in the main office, and they said, "Oh, hey, this might be the guy to help us with English language sports news." So it was kind of surprising. I went into an interview. It wasn't really an interview. It was more like,
"Here's what we want you to do."
Yeah, they were trying to persuade me to join. So, so I just... It was just another thing where I think I've been led down this path, and looking back at it now, it seems like a lot of coincidences, but it's kind of taken me this way.
Well, you also spent time coaching over there too. So, I mean, while there was that job, there was still, wrestling has basically been at the forefront of all of this stuff.
Yeah, which was hard to explain to my mother. She was my biggest wrestling fan when I was in high school, but after high school it just became a distraction. It became fun, and she didn't want me to do that. She wanted me to focus on becoming a success at whatever she thought that was.
Is that a cultural thing, or was just a needy mom thing?
No, I think we have these images of Asian mothers, which part of it is true.
You've also got an Americanized Asian mother, though, so it's not like you're over there growing up. You were over in the U.S. growing up with us.
Yeah.
So slightly different.
Yeah, it was, but no, she kept insisting that at some time I had to quit having fun and get on with my life, but one thing led to the next, and I ended up here. Actually, she couldn't understand why I even went to Japan after St. Thomas, after graduation. But it was just an opportunity that was presented to me by the College of St. Thomas, the College of St. Thomas.
At the time.
To go and teach English at a language school in Osaka. And then from there, I made some connections with local universities with wrestling teams, and the whole wrestling thing started up again. So, so that's how that whole Japan thing happened.
What's the college wrestling scene like in Japan? Obviously, we as American wrestling fans have an understanding of what our university system's like because we follow it, even Division I, Division II, Division III, NAI level. What's it like at the university level for college athletics and specifically wrestling in Japan?
Well, a lot of activities in high schools and in universities in Japan are, if you want to wrestle, you join the wrestling club. If you want to practice ikebana, you join the ikebana club and that. And part of it is learning to, part of club life in Japan is to work together, working as a group, so to speak, but learning how the dynamics of groups function. When you start out as a freshman, you are nothing, but even the best wrestler coming out of high school, if he's at your university, he's still a freshman and he has to contribute to the club the best way he can. And even if he's a star wrestler, he's still a freshman and he should be helping his classmates out because it's later on in life that those classmates will become more and more important to him. When I was coaching, of course, we appreciated when we had a star coming in to help out, but there were always professors and people like that reminding these young talents that, talent will get you so far, but it's your peers, it's your friends, it's your acquaintances in life that will help you make a life.
One thing that you're proud of where you're from. You're proud of Minnesota, and last time we saw each other, you were wearing your Minnesota Gopher wrestling shirt on the way out. You were actually wearing it when we got here a couple days ago, and you're rooting for the Farr brothers because they, like you, are from LeSueur. What's it like to follow Division I college wrestling from where you live now in the Czech Republic?
Great. With the wonders of internet communications, I can get streaming and things like that. I do have a couple of subscriptions to ESPN and
Big
NFL and
things like that.
Yeah. So it is possible to watch, although I probably shouldn't say this. I find it kind of boring.
Well, you've been a freestyle guy for a long time by now.
Well, freestyle Greco-Roman, I like it all internationally. The folk style, the American collegiate style is it's its own
animal, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
As far as speaking specifically from a LeSueur standpoint, it's knowing that you came from the same town these two brothers did. It's you've actually got a connection more than just being from Minnesota.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I signed up for the Big Ten and ESPN wrestling with the Farr brothers in mind. I wanted to see them wrestle. The only thing was which was really disappointing, is I could get ESPN, but a lot of the wrestling, I think, was on the Big Ten network, which I couldn't get.
Okay. There's ways around that. We'll talk about that off the air. But as we move forward now, you've become, and I don't want to use a couple years ago, I interviewed Bill for when I was working at USA Wrestling, and I used a term that, we'll just say he's now a wrestling savant, because you can walk up to Bill, and at any point during a tournament, you can have a conversation that leads to something you'll learn. I told him this morning that every time I talk to him, I learn something new. When it comes to the Japanese women's freestyle program, you're probably the one person outside of maybe Higuchi-san, who is their version of Gary Abbott in Japan, who has the knowledge of the depth and history of Japanese women's wrestling, with Sakamoto, Seiko, you've got the Obata. I've got so many different names. Icho, Yoshida, everybody that even predates them. Hamaguchi. What makes them so good? And this is, I guess, maybe we get to a tactical discussion somewhat. But what makes them so good and so just dominant? Not just the seniors; it goes down to the cadets and the juniors too.
Well, when FILA decided at the time that they needed for gender equity, they needed to promote women's wrestling back in the early 80s. And when FILA announced that they were going to do that to keep up with the times, I think 2/3 of the world said, no way, women's wrestling, you must be joking. However, at the time, there were a handful of Japanese that got behind it and started promoting it. It was already being developed here in Europe, in Norway and France in particular. The Japanese jumped in right away with some people who were good at judo, but they were never going to be, or they didn't have a really great shot at going to the Olympics for Japan, and they saw wrestling as a chance to compete internationally. Then there were a couple of coaches at the time that recognized early that because of physical differences, because of, I have to say psychological differences. It's neither positive or negative. It just, people respond to stress and other psychological situations in different ways. And but the physical, the psychological, the emotional, we had a couple of coaches in Japan that recognized that we can't coach women and young women to wrestle like men, and we couldn't coach them as if we were coaching young men. Terry Steiner from the United States recognizes this. Lee Veerling is one of the top female or one of the top coaches of women's wrestling in the world. He knows it. The whole approach, the whole idea, it's a different sport. So when the Americans came up with this idea that you wrestle like a girl, I think on the American side it means one thing, but on the Japanese side it's something completely different. And their secret is, from the very beginning, they've paid attention to some of the really subtle technical and tactical differences that the physical and the psychological present. Is that a PhD-worthy response?
Quite possibly, but there's also there's almost a regalness, I guess, that comes with the way the athletes that come to the mat, they bow. They bow to the officials. I mean, something that's, I guess, traditional in Japanese culture. But when you see, there's not a whole lot of showboating. There's not a whole lot of over-the-top celebrations, save an Olympic gold medal. Where do you think that type of discipline comes from?
Well, I think it begins with the culture. The mat, the dojo, where everyone practices their art is a place to be respected, to be revered. And so when you step into a dojo or onto a mat, there's for most wrestlers, there's there's a bow and a greeting when they come in, and then there's another bow and greeting when they go out. And it just carries over onto the mat.
One thing that's always I've found fascinating about especially the Japanese women is the media exposure. My first World Championships was in 2003 in Madison Square Garden, and that was a monster Japanese team, and that was a monster American team. They tied in points, but Japan won the World Championship by virtue of most gold medals. When the athletes came off the mat, there are photographers just swarming. How did this media exposure begin, and why is it still such a big thing when the Yoshidas and the Ichos come off the mat and they are just literally swarmed? It could be in Uzbekistan or London or Denmark or New York City. They're going to follow it.
Yeah.
And it's big news.
Well, some of it is the nature of media in Japan. There are so many journalists, bloggers, media wannabes out there, and they all carve their little niche. And being a follower of women's wrestling because of the women's success has become very popular. There are lots of people, men, women, young men, boys and girls who want to follow wrestling. You know, they're successful, they win.
They do commercials.
Yeah,
I mean, Yoshida was all over commercials, right?
Yeah, she's a very popular personality. She's promoted by the Olympic Committee, by the Wrestling Federation. In fact, they have to kind of manage her. Manage her time for her by, only at this time and only under these situations, things like that, because the demand is so high, even today. But I'm curious to see what happens in Paris, because there'll be a couple of new young women on this team for the Japanese, and how they will handle it. But, the Japanese Wrestling Federation, the coaches, the directors and that they've already been through it with Saudi and Kaori. So I think they know how to handle it. And then also with the Japan Wrestling Federation, Ikuo Higuchi, our friend and colleague, is also very good at managing these things. He was actually at Kyoto when I was there. That's where we first met. But no, he's the consummate pro when it comes to organizing media and managing all of this attention that the women get, and now some of the younger men who have had success, or we expect success from, are beginning to draw that kind of popularity.
With all the names that have come through, who's the best in your opinion that you've ever seen?
The best that I've ever seen?
Who's the best women's wrestler you've ever seen, whether it be Japan or anywhere around the world?
Well, I don't think anyone can argue with Kaori Icho.
Right.
She's 4-time Olympic gold medalist.
First one ever, regardless of style, gender, whatever.
Yeah. She's lost a couple matches along the way, but she's unflappable. She's never been disturbed by it. It's just part of the process. And I've always admired her psyche in that. Technically, going back to the days of the pioneers, I would have to, sometimes on the, you'll hear the wrestling match that who would be the two people you would want to see wrestle. Right. And you get all kinds of names, like Hulk Hogan and Carlene, or Dan Gable and John Smith, or some silly thing like that. I mean, not silly, but if I had my wish, there was a pioneer back in the 80s and 90s Yayoi Urano, 6-time world champion. One of the pioneers. No one knew about her except the women who were involved in wrestling. But technically, she was as precise and as curious about technique as Icho, with the same kind of indomitable spirit. And as I followed Kaori over the years, I could see a lot of Yayoi in there too. So if I was going to have an ideal wrestling match, it would be those two, because they're so perfectly matched in my book.
Now, you still carry an American passport. You've got the Japanese heritage and the time you spent over there and then living in Europe all these years. And now we look at 2016, and we saw something that had never been done. One, somebody beat Saori Yoshida at the Olympics. And two, it was an American, Helen Maroulis, winning the country's first Olympic gold medal in women's wrestling. What did that moment mean to you in terms of a journalist? Because we've got to stay impartial.
Yeah.
And it's hard in some situations, whether I'm announcing, trying to hold back the emotion of watching what I just seen, history, and you're sitting there, and this has probably happened with various athletes you've known over the years. I'm sure it happens, but what did that moment mean for women's wrestling as a whole? Whereas you've got something that had never happened from a country that likes to believe it's a superpower in wrestling against basically Superwoman until that point.
Yeah. I was, that it happened. This is the ebb and flow of life. You know, Saudi was getting older. She was being distracted. It was Helen's time. I accepted that even before going to Rio.
So it didn't surprise you?
No. It wouldn't have surprised me if Saudi was able to pull out the win, but it was, with all of the distractions around Saudi going into Rio, I began to wonder, and after Helen beat Sophia Matson in the semifinals, I thought, she's
like
primed.
Decisively.
She's primed.
Yeah, I would tech pinned her basically.
Yeah,
it was over, and then she said, "I'm going to finish it."
Yeah, but to Helen's credit, her general reaction was so impressive, because it wasn't this wild celebration. It was just a hug.
And there was some photos afterward, both of the women on their knees crying. And some people said, you don't know who won or who lost, because it was such an emotional moment for both athletes.
Yeah. I'm getting choked up thinking about it a little bit. I wasn't this way in Rio.
Because we can't be. As journalists, you've got to put it away. And granted, there's a lot of national pride in people, Gary and Richard and Team USA, the people over there. Of course, they're going to be rooting, but if you're working for United World Wrestling, you can't play that. So, holding back that type of stuff is tough.
Yeah. But the general reaction in Japan that I heard was, the vast majority of wrestling fans, sports fans in Japan were really impressed by the way Helen handled herself. It was,
in the respect that there wasn't a trash talk, there wasn't like a chest beat type of situation.
No.
Like it was a respectful victory.
Yeah. I mean, Helen is a class act. I don't know much about her, but everything I've seen is
she's a good kid.
Yeah, she's a class act, and the way she treated the legend was also class.
Mm-hmm. Shifting gears to the state of wrestling today, we had that scare in 2013. We've got rules. We've got rankings now. You're a big part of the media team and various international travel from your home base in the Czech Republic. But what is wrestling fun again for you? Is it fun to watch again, better compared to the, as I say, the binary code of wrestling, the 10-01-10 days?
We all had a really rough year last year, just with traveling and qualifications and that. And I still haven't completely recovered from all of the work. I do enjoy wrestling, and I enjoy whether it's Olympic wrestling or if it's just little kids on the mat. I go to a couple of clubs in the Czech Republic and show them little things with techniques and some freestyle or Greco-Roman or women's wrestling, whatever. But that's always fun to give a younger wrestler, to teach them the joy of wrestling or to get them started. We've been on this path for a long, long time, but to get somebody new started. As far as the Olympic wrestling goes and the championships, there are good matches. There are some explosive moves, some tense situations or dynamic situations
that may or may not involve Mongolians.
Yeah.
Your position probably precludes you from answering that, but go ahead.
No, it's I enjoy watching a good wrestling match, but at this level we have the best in the world, and sometimes it's predictable, but there's always the hope for something unpredictable, like Kinchigashvili in the European Championships.
Getting bombed on his head.
Yeah, and then coming back.
That was a great match.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that are like, you remember. Like, dude, you remember that year Kinchigashvili got dropped on his head? He got 5'd and then won? Yeah, those are the stories.
Yeah, but I think for me now, at this August point in my life, for me,
well put.
the real pleasure is to introduce new people to wrestling, teaching some younger wrestlers the joys of knowing how the body works, and then later on explaining to them how the body and the mind and the spirit are all connected. So, yeah, I'm when we're here as we are now for the junior Europeans, it's a job. The juniors are kind of fun to watch because they make mistakes and sometimes they're unpredictable. But
sometimes you might see the breakout performances are here. Yeah. They're like, this guy's going to be good.
But
or girl.
But when we get to the Worlds, the level there is so high, and it's becoming more and more difficult for wrestlers to maintain a level of excellence such as Yoshida and Icho had done for all those years. We'll see people win 3-4 gold medals in a row, but I don't think we'll ever see anything like that again, because it's with the rules and the technology and everything like that, it's just so hard. So, but yeah, it really gets back to the young wrestlers and getting them started, and hopefully it's not about there was this old thing about it's not about winning or losing, and why are we keeping score?
Well, because it's a sport based on winning and losing too.
Yeah, but when people can get beyond the idea, and instead of, it is a sport. We want it to continue being an Olympic sport. People still want to win their medals and things like that, but for those of us involved in wrestling, it's much more than that. It's a way of life. It's a do, as in judo, aikido. It's a path that we follow, and part of it is to introduce younger people to this path.
Wrapping things up here as we're getting ready for a final session within the half hour. Shout-outs to Minnesota. How often do you make it back? Anybody out there you want to say hi to? I know Scott Davis and I brought up your name a couple weeks ago at the Hall of Fame weekend in Stillwater, Oklahoma, not Stillwater, Minnesota. But what's you still got the connection to Minnesota? How often do you make it back? And who do you want to say hey to out there?
Well, probably nobody listening to this program.
The entire state of Minnesota listens to this show, okay. By the way.
But, Scotty, I'm sorry I didn't write immediately after Jason woke me at 3 a.m. to tell me that he was in touch with you.
I didn't expect you to answer it right away anyway, but okay.
But, no, right now, I like going home. I stay in touch with my cousins. I have great cousins and friends in LeSueur. But wrestling people, everyone from the Minnesota Wrestling Club and Storm and maybe the one person I can say is, to Kevin Slack. Would it hurt you to drop me an email, post something on Facebook? The guy's a hermit, somewhere between LeSueur and Belle Plaine and Jordan, somewhere in there. He's a hermit farmer. Haven't heard from him in ages. So Slack, if you're listening,
I'll tell Nick to put that in touch with you. Anyway, Bill May, thanks for the time.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Support wrestling in the land of 10,000 wrestlers by subscribing to The Guillotine. 9 issues a year for just $20, the best value in Minnesota wrestling. Subscribe at theguillotine.com/subscribe.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.